Gluten-free, we have gluten-free buns for gluten-free folks. No? Okay.
The bottom here? Or wait, if you go here and then 2 files, it'll take you to your other documents. So then 2 files at the top. And then go to the, or I could do the Vanna White thing and I could be up here.
All right, well, good afternoon. All right, now we have a mic and everything. Good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to have all of you here today. My name is Ken Frank. I have been at Brenau for 20 years and did a lot of teaching in the conflict resolution legal studies area. First of all, I want to thank Crystal and her shop for inviting me here today. It's always an opportunity to share some of these conflict resolution concepts with faculty, staff, and others, because I really believe that this is an important part of what we are about as human beings in our communities and in our jobs and in our interactions with one another. So I want to encourage you to take some of these lessons and talk about them among yourselves, and certainly I'm going to be working with Crystal to offer a series of these later on to see if there's enough interest to hold some sessions in it. We used to years ago do a 20-hour training on conflict resolution for faculty and staff, and I've thought about reinstituting that again. And it's a good, I know I've got at least one survivor of that back here with Dr. Birch. She's been through that, and it's been a useful skill for people to carry into the workplace. I want to start out today by doing a little bit of self-assessment. And I hate to interrupt your lovely lunch, but each of you should have a worksheet that asks you about your response to conflict. Now let's talk about this for just a couple of minutes. I don't want you to use this worksheet other than to give your first impression. Don't try to outthink it. Don't try to outsmart it or outguess it. It's a very simple version of a inventory that's been out in the public for a long time called the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. And the Thomas Kilmann is a much more sophisticated instrument than this one, but this one gets at some of the same concepts. And so what I would ask you to do is take a couple minutes, read the 23 prompts that are there, answer 1 through 5, and then we'll go to the score sheet and we'll tell you how to score these responses, and then we'll talk about what they mean. So take a few minutes between bites and fill out this worksheet. And for those of you online, I'm hoping you have access to the worksheets as well, and that you can go ahead and fill these out. Now, when you have finished with the worksheet, it's for your own use only. It's not being turned in. It's not being evaluated. You don't have to even show it to your neighbor. And your neighbor should not look over at your answers and say, boy, I always knew you were one of those. That's not what it's supposed to be used for. So it's for some self-knowledge and self-assessment. So take a couple minutes, go through down that inventory, and then we'll talk about it.
Did you say this is the first time?
The worksheet, the one that looks like this, yeah, just go through it and mark it up, and then we'll talk about how to score it.
Hey, how are you?
That's all right.
So we're doing the first 5, or
You're doing all of them, all 23 items. Just go right through it.
Scale.
Dr. Toombs, I love the setting in here, being surrounded by this art. This is lovely.
Beautiful. This is the
Yeah.
first time we've done this. So You've got a Zoom participant asking if you can put the form up on the, sorry, yes.
Absolutely.
Do you have that, Dr.? We can share, you didn't have to come out of it.
No,
Oh, you have it?
yeah, I've got it. I've got it loaded at the bottom. I loaded all the forms before I came in.
Well, no, you have to share the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Do what needs to be done.
Okay. They just wanted to be shared. We're trying to share the screen.
That's already shared.
They can't see it. Some people couldn't see it. They can't see the form. No, and I emailed it to everybody, but I don't know.
I got it.
No, the people on Zoom.
I'll share.
Hello, everyone.
You share.
Okay.
That's fine. So they're gonna see what's right here. So if you
Yes,
want to
which is
open up,
fine. That's fine.
So I want to put up the, you want me to put the worksheet first?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on screen now is the sheet that all of you should be working on. And once you have finished it, we can move to the score sheet. Yes.
Wait, let's do that one.
This is the one I want you to do at this point. Yes, Mary.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. We'll talk about the other one too.
Okay. They wanted the inventory on the screen. Okay.
Well, good.
Yes, we're good. Is that the one we're supposed to do, or we're supposed to do the worksheet?
I put the wrong one up, didn't I?
Okay, good.
You've done the worksheet, which is the one I wanted you to do. Want me to put up the other one? There, that's the worksheet that you're all supposed to be working on with the 23 items. And most of you probably had a chance to work your way through that. So those of you that are in the room, if you want to take your score sheet, I'll explain to you how you should score that. Question 1 was a collaboration question. And if you look on the far right hand of your score sheet, you'll see a collaboration column. And you need to put in the numeric score that you put for collaboration for question 1. In other words, if you marked it as a 5, put a 5 in there. If you marked it as a 1, put a 1 in there. And yes, there's some addition required at the end of this process, but it won't kill you. Okay? It's only adding numbers 1 through 5. I think we can manage that. So question 1 is a collaboration question, put your score in there. Question 2 is a competition question, and put your score in there, and so on for the 23 items. For those of you that are Zooming online, I understand you were emailed both the worksheet and the score sheet. And so currently I'll leave the worksheet up for a couple more minutes and then I'll move to the score sheet so that you can see it as well. And again, the idea behind this worksheet, don't try to outguess it or outsmart it, just put in your first impression and you'll get a more reliable indication of how you respond to conflict, which is what this worksheet is all about. This worksheet really gives you what your fallback position is when you're confronted with conflict. I have a good friend who for many years ran the consortium on negotiation and conflict resolution at Georgia State. And I once asked her why she was drawn to this kind of work, and she said, well, as a kid, whenever there was a confrontation, instead of running away from it, I ran toward it. And that really is the kind of mentality that she displayed when she was running that office at Georgia State. So, you know, we all respond to conflict in different ways, and not any one of them is wrong, and not any one of them is right. And we'll talk about what those differences mean. I'll go ahead and put up the score sheet for those of you that are Zooming. And again, on your worksheet, once you've answered a question, look for where you put that score on the score sheet, and there are the 4 columns. This is not a terribly sophisticated instrument. It'll just give you some general ideas. It's not like taking the Thomas Kilmann, which is a much longer instrument, but for our purposes today, this will work just fine. Once you've filled in all the numbers from the various items on the worksheet, then just add up your scores. If you need a calculator, there's one on your phone, I'm not so sure cell phones have been a good thing for us. I think they are making us less smart than we used to be. How many phone numbers do you know anymore compared to what you used to know? Yeah, and I'm beginning to worry a little bit about using GPS and mapping so much as you drive to places. If you turn it on kind of automatically, you're not thinking about where you're driving to anymore. You're waiting for the little voice to tell you. Yeah. All right. Many of you have worked your way through the score sheet, and if not, just continue to do so, because I want to go ahead and talk about what these scores mean. Let me get to my PowerPoint. Basically what this inventory and what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is all about is how you deal with conflict. And this little inventory really lets us look at accommodation, collaboration, avoidance, and competitive. It doesn't really do much about compromise because it's not a very sophisticated inventory. But what we can do with these 5 things is place them on a grid. And on the left side of the grid is your level of cooperation, whether it's low or high. And on the right side, on the bottom side is your level of assertiveness, whether it's low or high. This body of learning, folks, came out of the industrial psychology field. For many years, employers wanted to know how their employees would respond if they were faced with conflict, and so they did a bunch of research back in the 1950s and found out that there were actually 5 ways that people respond to conflict. They either accommodate, they avoid, they collaborate, they compromise, or they become competitive. And that body of research has remained consistent over the past 70 years, and the conflict resolution field began to draw upon this research back in the late 80s and realized that it had a lot to say about how we as individuals respond to conflict. So these different approaches allow us to kind of see where we come out at. And for me, the more interesting is where you are not using these approaches. So let's talk about each one of these individually. The first one is avoidance. Avoidance of conflict. You basically are in the bottom corner of the little chart. You are not assertive and you are not worried about being terribly cooperative. People who use avoidance tend to have a non-committal way of dealing with things like this. They say things like, what problem? There's no conflict here. I don't see any conflict. Or they might make irrelevant remarks like, I'll just get over it. Or they deny that the conflict even exists. Now, folks, there's nothing wrong with avoidance as a strategy for dealing with one another. Okay? I've worked here for 20 years. I've been married for twice that. Are there things that I do that drive my wife nuts? Of course. Okay, are there things in any routine relationship that the other person does that drive you nuts? Of course. Does that mean you have to confront them about it on a daily basis? Of course not. Okay, there are some things that aren't worth fighting about. Okay, so avoidance is not always a bad strategy to use when you're faced with conflict. Why would you use avoidance? Well, maybe it's not the right time to deal with it, or maybe you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Or maybe you fear what happens if you dive into this particular conflict. And so there are a lot of good reasons that you might use avoidance as a strategy. And I'm not saying it's a bad strategy. So if you scored high on avoidance on your score sheet, it's not a negative thing. Now, Fisher and Urey, when they wrote the book Getting to Yes, and published it in the 1980s, really came up with some vernacular that we all use today, the win, 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 lose, lose, lose kind of stuff. And we talk about avoidance as being a lose-lose situation. It's only lose-lose if the conflict never, ever gets addressed and escalates. So it's not always a lose-lose, but you got to realize that if you're using avoidance as your sole strategy for dealing with conflict, you're never really confronting any conflict. And it might lead to an escalation that will be bad for everybody later. So avoidance is not all bad. Oh, and I got to tell you, the Ohio State Commission on Dispute Resolution has taken this body of knowledge and used it to help kids to deal with bullying, which I think is really a neat strategy. And, of course, to deal with kids, they wanted a mascot for each one of these styles. And the Ohio State Commission got very creative on their mascot for avoidance. Can you guess what the critter might be that they used as a mascot for avoidance?
Ostrich.
Turtle. A turtle is a perfect mascot for this, because what does a turtle do? It withdraws into its shell, it doesn't address anything, and that's a great strategy unless it's in the middle of the road and an 18-wheeler's coming. Not such a good strategy at that point. So, you know, the Ohio State Commission really came up with what I thought was some clever ways to communicate this with kids. Well, let's talk about accommodation. Oh, you love accommodating people. They are so nice to be around. Where do you want to go to lunch? I don't care. Any place you want to go is fine with me. Well, let's go to the same place we went to yesterday. That would be lovely. Going to lunch there would be just wonderful. Oh, you love accommodating people. They're so nice to be around, and they're always so pleasant until they've had enough. Okay? Accommodating people are really, they are lovely people, and they always do what others want and not what they might want. Hey, let's go to that place that got closed down by the health department last week. Oh, that'll be fun. I have no problem with that. Okay? So you always do what others want and not what you want, and notice that it shows up on the side of the little grid where you have a high desire to work together with others, but not so much asserting your own interests. And so Fisher and Urey would categorize this as a win-lose relationship, and it also shows a lack of confidence sometimes about trying to get your own needs met. Now, the Ohio State Commission, I think, was very clever in coming up with a mascot for this one, too. They, again, are teaching kids about bullying and the ramifications of that. Can you guess what critter they used for a mascot for accommodating? I love this one. I thought this one was really clever. A chameleon. A chameleon. Yeah, you always kind of blend into the background. You don't really assert yourself. You're not really out there. I usually get dog and things when I ask this question, and dogs are pretty amenable most of the time. All right. Now, the problem with accommodation, if it's always used, at some point, you don't want to be a doormat. At some point, you don't want the other to always get their needs met and you not to get your needs met. Now, accommodating people can act out in some pretty destructive ways with regard to relationships. They tend to get quite passive-aggressive. when their needs are not being met and they've had enough. And so, you know, being accommodating is a perfectly good way to respond to a lot of things, as long as it's not the only way that you're responding to things. Well, let's talk about the opposite, and that's competitive. Oh, you know this person too, okay? This is the person that always says, it's my way or the highway. They go out to your car and they yell shotgun so that they can sit in the front seat, right? You know this person. Now, they are lovely people, and I got to tell you, if you weren't competitive, you wouldn't be sitting here today, okay? You wouldn't have competed for your job. You wouldn't have competed for the position you have. You'd be home eating bonbons on the couch, okay? So a little competitiveness is not a bad thing at all. Now, the problem is if competitive is your only response to conflict, where you always have to assert that it's your way, it's always your way, then you start losing people, you start losing friends. If you look around and say, gosh, nobody's my friend around here anymore, and I'm very competitive, and you might kind of say, gee, maybe there's a reason for this. They don't like to get run over all the time. And maybe I need to look at other ways of responding to conflict other than just being competitive. It is a one-up relationship. It's a dominance relationship. It's a win-lose outcome, according to Fisher and Urey. And you look out for yourself regardless of what others want, so you're not concerned about their needs. You're only concerned about yours. Again, I thought the Ohio State Commission was quite clever in coming up with a mascot for this one. Can you guess what critter they might have used for this?
A lion?
A lion, exactly. Lions are not known as very sharing, okay? Here, Mr. Hyena, have my leftover kill. It doesn't work that way. So the Ohio State Commission really talked about the impact that using competitive as your only response can have. All right, let's talk about the one in the middle, and that's compromise. Your little score sheet doesn't reflect compromise because it's not that sophisticated of an instrument, but let's talk about it because sometimes it's the best you can do. It's the middle of assertiveness, it's the middle of cooperation, it's a give and take type outcome. The goal is some sort of an equal exchange. Neither party totally gets what they want. Fisher and Urey describe it as a lose-lose or a weak win-win. But again, sometimes it's the best you can do. If there's limited time or limited resources, limited money, you might have to compromise. Take the example of two people going to see the movies at the movie theater where there are lots of choices. On the way to the movie, you find out you don't want to see the same movie. I want to see this one, you want to see that one. Okay, there's some ways to respond to this. You can say, well, they start about the same time. You go to your movie, I'll go to mine. That's a perfectly rational outcome, unless you really wanted to sit with a person during the movie, okay? Then it's not such a good outcome. You could say something that's accommodating, like, okay, let's see your movie this week, and maybe we can see mine next week, okay? You could do an accommodation kind of thing. You could do an avoidance and say, okay, fine, whatever you want, and just let the other person choose the movie, and you sit there and hate the movie the entire time you're in there, but you don't say anything about it. All right, so there's a lot of ways to approach this thing, and you could come up with some sort of compromise that would allow you to both see the movie that you want. You could hide in the theater and see the other one on the second show. No, let's not do that. All right, so there's a bunch of ways to respond to this, and sometimes compromise is realistically the best thing you can do because there's limited resources, limited time, limited money, and so forth. And unless you can expand the pie in some way, you might have to compromise. Now, one of the things that we always encourage people to do is look for ways to expand the pie. And in conflict, sometimes you get so locked into your position, you don't see ways to expand the pie. There's a fun exercise that I do with groups when I'm doing this kind of training, and it involves an orange. And basically, you sit the orange between two people, and you give each of them a short role play. One of them wants the orange for the peel to put into icing to make the icing taste great on a cake. The other one wants the fruit to put into a salad. So realistically, one orange can satisfy both needs, right? Right. But the problem is, in their roles, they each want the orange, and they've dealt with the other person before, and the other person's not very nice and giving, and so they figure they need the whole orange, right? I've done this exercise with groups of attorneys, and I've done it with third graders. Now, third graders have an interesting response from time to time. They grab the orange and run out of the room. Okay? That's one way to get your needs met, right? I think some of the attorneys wanted to do that too, but they couldn't quite, leave aside the professional decorum enough to do that. However, what you need to do is communicate with each other to a level that you find out what each other needs. And in actuality, one orange satisfies both needs. Many times people figure it out and they get it sorted out. But what's really funny is that I always bring enough oranges for everybody, because after you've stared at that stupid orange, you want one, right? So we always have enough oranges for everybody. But that's, that's compromise, and sometimes compromise is the best you can do. Let's talk about the last one, and that's collaboration. And really the orange illustration helps us illustrate collaboration, because one orange meets both needs. Collaboration is kind of what we strive for in mediation. We try to get the parties to work together so both of their needs are met, and they are working with each other to make sure that that happens. You work through the problem. Maybe you combine resources. You don't give up and just compromise. You find ways to expand the pie. You find things of value for each party that they maybe hadn't thought about, and try to come up with a collaborative outcome. Oh, I skipped the mascot on compromise, didn't I? The mascot on compromise from the Ohio State Commission I thought was clever too, because they said it's a zebra. Is it black stripes on white or white stripes on black? It's a compromise animal. So I thought it was a cute choice for a mascot for compromise. So collaboration, you work together, you come up with ways to expand the pie. You make sure that not only are your needs met, but everyone else's needs are met. It's what Fisher and Urey would describe as a win-win situation, and say that it is the best approach in one of these kinds of situations. You work jointly and you accept responsibility for your part of it. So as a mediator, I'm always looking for some sort of collaborative outcome that I can move the parties toward. Because if it's an outcome that they've helped to fashion and they've helped to come up with, it's a much more lasting outcome. None of us like to be told what to do. And that's the beauty of mediation, where you can come up with an outcome that is satisfactory to the parties without having one imposed on you by a judge. I used to litigate cases, and I never walked out of cases where everybody was happy. And if one side's too happy, it gets appealed. So that's kind of the way it goes in the courtroom. Mediation is a far more desirable outcome. Now, if you've had an opportunity to look through your score sheet, you've got some totals there. And I'm guessing that at Brenau, as I know many of you and know the kinds of things that you do, I'm going to guess that collaboration was one of your top 2 scores. Am I correct? Yeah. And that's very typical for our environment, for the way that we work, and it's one of the reasons I've stayed here, because we play well together most of the time. However, what's interesting is to look at those numbers that are low and ask yourself, why don't I use these strategies when I'm confronted with conflict? And might my life be different if I did? Okay? Maybe I don't have to fight about everything all the time. Okay? Maybe I can avoid a conflict or two, and life will go on and things will be okay. So look at those lower end scores, because I think they give you some information that you might not have about yourself, and it might be useful for you to examine and see if, gosh, maybe those strategies can help us. So anybody have any questions about this little inventory? And yeah.
What was the end goal for?
Oh, You tell me. You tell me. What's the animal for collaborative? An elephant. Okay. Not it, but a good answer. Okay. Animal for compromise. Or not compromise, for collaboration. Dog. Okay. I grew up in Colorado. I don't know much about this animal. The Ohio State Commission said a group of dolphins. Because they work, I would have come up with answer B's. Okay, I would have thought answer B's would have been a collaborative animal. But they said that dolphins really do work together. If one of them is injured, they push it to the surface so it can breathe. I mean, they have a lot of reasons why they picked dolphins, and I'm good with that. I just don't know as much about it. I didn't know that it was as clever of a choice as some of their others, but that's the one they chose. All right, so let's shift gears just a little bit. And I'm going to get, this is the summary slide about how the Ohio State Commission used this for school children. And again, here are your choices on the mascots. And I thought some of them were obvious and some of them were clever, and that's what they use to teach kids. So let's shift gears just a little bit, and we get a little academic on it here. I try not to do that too much in these presentations, but Len Riskin is a longtime mediator in Florida. And he did some really good research on obstacles that get in the way of managing conflict in a mediation. And some of those kind of bleed over from what we just did. The first one, overly self-centered perspectives. Okay? If you can only think about yourself and you can't think about the other, how are you going to actually reach some sort of an agreement in mediation? Okay? Another factor that gets in the way, strong negative emotions. Okay, you've got to get beyond the hate before you can come to some sort of an agreement. Once had a client who wanted a divorce, and she really despised her husband. I said, well, we file this in state court and we move forward. She says, can't you file it in federal court? I said, no, we can't hate him all over the U.S. We can only hate him here in the state. So you have some pretty strong negative emotions that can get in the way of this process. And then number 3 is such a classic. We have habitual ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving because we don't really attend to what's going on in the present. We rely on what's happened in the past. And we get stuck in patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving that just really don't move us forward. And sometimes as a mediator, you have to dislodge the disputants from those habitual ways of thinking and feeling and behaving. The fourth one, sensitivity to emotions, too much or too little. One of the things they failed to teach you in law school is how to respond to emotions. And fortunately, most of you know my spouse. She is a PhD psychologist, and she has helped me down that road considerably in my mediation work. And I have learned a tremendous amount from her how to deal with emotions in the mediation and conflict environment. And handing a person a Kleenex is not sufficient. Although not handing them a Kleenex is even worse. It gets really messy. Okay. Do the parties have insufficient social skills or communication skills to even talk to one another and try to work through issues with one another? You'd be surprised in a mediation environment how often you will get this statement from one of the parties. I didn't know you felt like that. Okay, I didn't know. And some of that is just, there's inadequate recognition of the other. Some of it is failure to communicate. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that statement, but we see it a lot. And then the last one is an inadequate focus. We are so distracted as human beings, we fail to focus on what's in front of us. It's so much easier to be thinking about what happened back then or what's going to happen out into the future than it is to be focused in the present. And a lot of the work that we do as mediators is to get people to dislodge themselves from the past, focus on the present, and then begin to look out into the future to see what they want this relationship to look like out in the future, 5 years from now, 5 months from now. And so we try to get them to focus on what is current. And that takes me to developing some self-awareness about where you're at. Now, I don't know about you folks, but that picture, the first one on the left, that looks like inside my head a lot of days. Okay? Sort of a mindless, a way of approaching life. You're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the past. Did I really set the alarm at the house when I left today? Did I really close the garage door? How many of you have turned around, gone back, and looked to see if you closed the garage door? Did I unplug the iron? Okay? All of these things that we do that we don't think about doing that get in the way of our ability to be realistic about where we're at in the present rather than being stuck in the past or the future. We tend to be chaotic and fleeting about our attention. Okay? How many of you have done this? Walked into a room to get something, gotten into the room, and not remembered what the hell you walked in there for. Okay. I used to attribute that to the fact I have gray hair now, but I'm not so sure that that's not always been the case, because it has. Focusing is not easy. Our thought patterns are diffuse. They're not in the moment. On the other hand, there's mindfulness. And that's when you're paying attention to your present experience. Your awareness is organized. When you ate those potato chips today, you tasted it. You felt the saltiness on your tongue. You enjoyed the crunch when you crunched into them. How many of you ate your potato chips mindfully today? Oh, a couple of you. Good for you guys. All right. Most of the time, how do you eat your potato chips? No, I ate my potato chips. All right. And you don't do it in a mindful way. In conflict resolution, your focus is on making peace. And you stay focused in the now. Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to assess your own mindfulness. The second inventory that you picked up today, if you've not taken an opportunity to fill that one out, go ahead and fill it out. And once again, people, it's not for sharing with your neighbor, it's for your own knowledge. You don't look over at your neighbor's paper and say, I always knew you were a mindless person. Come. This is actually some research that came out of Virginia. And the folks at Old Dominion are doing some work on mindfulness, and I thought it was worth sharing with you. And there is a backside to your handout. Don't forget about it. Some of these inventory items, you go, ooh, yeah, ooh, that's me. I think we've all been there. Once again, don't try to outguess it, just give your first impression. And once again, math is required. You've got to take an average of the 15 items. Add them all up, divide by 15.
Add them all up and divide them by 15. And
Yeah, of course. This is not an exact science. Some of these are just classic. I tend not to notice feelings of physical tension or discomfort until they really grab my attention. How many of you have gone home, noticed you got a bruise on your arm or leg, and you think, geez, how did that get there?
Right.
When did I do that?
Right.
Okay? You're not in the moment. Okay? Or if you're in the moment, you'll do it and say, oh, that's going to leave a mark. Right? Yeah. We've all been there. How about I forget a person's name almost as soon as I've been told it for the first time?
Yeah.
My name is Sutherland, right? No, it's not. Okay, so oh, and then this one, there's one on the back that just cracks me up. I drive places on automatic pilot and wonder why how did I get here? How many of you have missed your exit You go, well, maybe the cell phone's a good thing. Turn now, recalculating. So it's really funny how you get stuck in these patterns. And then the last one, I snack without being aware that I am eating. Or how about what you're eating? Yes. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay. So this scale is just meant for you to take for yourself and get an idea of what it looks like. And obviously, the higher scores reflect higher levels of dispositional mindfulness. Okay? So if you got a high score, you can say, gosh, I'm in tune with myself most of the time.
Yeah, what would be a higher level?
Well,
What's the danger zone?
Danger zone would be 3 or below, I would think. 'Cause you're not really with the game very often. Okay? Now, there's an event tonight. No, not that event. A different event. Tonight, the moon is supposed to be as close to Earth as it will be this year. It's a blue moon, right? Which means it's the second time you've had a full moon in a month. Okay? And we're supposed to have really good, clear atmosphere tonight. I know it's cold as blazes outside, but step outside, take a look at the moon, and know what that moment's like. Okay? You'll be in the present. And then you can go in and deal with the other event that's on TV. Okay? Yeah, that event. Or you may want to stay outside and just look at the moon. The choice is certainly yours. But as you leave today, and I'm going to give you enough time to be able to do that, as you leave today and walk outside, don't just walk with the thought of, this is what I got to do, this is what I got to do, this is what I got to do. Okay? Walk outside with the thought of, wow, it's winter in North Georgia. It's cold, it's crisp, it's clear, it's beautiful out here. What are the birds saying? Okay? The birds are saying it's cold out here, right? What are the squirrels doing? Okay? What's going on out here? Do I hear a dog barking? Do I hear the traffic? Okay? Sort of kind of get into the moment and see if you can preserve that moment at least till you get back to your desk. Okay? When all hell breaks loose and you have to deal with everything that came in on email and everything that came in on voicemail and everything, right? Okay. And now you're going to be transported away from the moment and back to things that are in the past or in the future. But for a brief period of time, you'll at least be in the moment. Okay. Thank you for your attention. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do with the Conflict Resolution and Legal Studies program. First of all, I've got lawyers all over the U.S. at this point that have gone on to law school from Brenau, and they're doing great, wonderful things. Got a lot of folks that have gone into social work and other human services work from the major. Folks that have taken their degrees and just gone out into the workplace and been successful. So we think that the Conflict Resolution and Legal Studies major is a good way for students to proceed. And if you run across students who are undecided, send them my way. The other thing is that you probably hear me in regards to the mediation competitions and the tournaments that we have around here. This past fall, we hosted 2 tournaments. We hosted our usual Brenau tournament in early October, but we also hosted the International Undergraduate Mediation Tournament. We had 28 teams here from San Diego to Boston. And it was a really good tournament. The students did really good work, and I was very impressed with the level of skills they bring to this tournament. And so we do that kind of work every year. And in the interim, my wife and I get opportunities to do some training other places. We're going to be at the Southeast Regional Convention of the Boys and Girls Clubs later in February, giving some training on conflict resolution for the folks that are working, with our youth that need a lot of help. And we'll be talking about conflict resolution bullying and other such things. And we've also had an opportunity to do some things internationally, and hopefully those opportunities will keep coming too. But I appreciate your attention today. If you are at all interested in this kind of work, and like I said, I've done this before, if there's enough people who we can find enough time to meet periodically, we'll do a 20-hour training on conflict resolution and see if we can get some folks trained in some conflict resolution concepts that you might find useful, not only here at Brenau, but in other places that you may be. I always tell the students, I said, this is not a work skill, it's a life skill. And I would be glad to, with Crystal's help, to put together such a session of trainings, and we'll see what we can do. I thank you for your attention, and I appreciate the fact you're willing to play along with some of these inventories.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. We are going to send you out the PowerPoint and the handouts again. And I worked with Amy to come up with a survey so that way, if you are interested in the training, we'll have a good indication of who is interested, and we'll have your contact information, and we can see if we can get that started, because I think that would be very valuable. For my Zoom participants, we are going to, if the training is developed, we are going to have a component in there so that you can take advantage of the training as well. So don't feel isolated if you're not here on the Gainesville campus. We will accommodate you. This session was recorded. I inadvertently sent out the wrong Zoom ID. So anyone who may have texted you or emailed you and said they couldn't get on, that was true. So we have recorded it, and I'll send out the recording as well. So anyone who wasn't here, they can look at the recording. I'll put a couple of trick questions in there just to make sure that they viewed it, and they'll get a certificate as well. Also, I just wanted to give a little announcement regarding our next Lunch and Learn, which will be in March 27th. And the location I have to get with Danielle to make sure we have space. But the topic is going to be creating a culture of integrity. And that's going to be with Dr. Byron McCrae. He's actually from Davidson College. He's the VP of Student Life and the Dean of Students. So he's going to just talk about, at Davidson, they don't have Turnitin or anything like that regarding their students. They actually just have a strong integrity policy, and it has worked for the institution. So it saved them thousands of dollars because they don't have those types of mechanisms in place. They actually go on an honor system. So he's going to talk to us about how they created that culture and how that's working for them. And hopefully we can save some money and employ some of their techniques as well. So that is going to be on March 27th. You'll be getting some information about that. And thank you all so much, remotely and present, for coming. We really appreciate you. Have an awesome day. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So, do I need this? I've sent all this information. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Yes, she
Thank you.